Alrighty, we are live. So welcome, day two of TMF Career Week, hosted by LMK. Excited to be back on day two with some new faces, including myself. So welcome, everyone. This session is going to focus on technical skills. Yesterday's section was soft skills. Just differentiating a little bit today. Excited to talk about some new aspects with everyone. But before we dive into today's topic, I think it's important that you all know who you're dealing with, right? Who are going to be your facilitators and hosts for the conversation today and technical skills and what are our backgrounds. So I'll start since I kind of been rambling already. So I am Ben Rogers. I'm a senior manager here at LMK of our TMF education department. I've been in the TMF space for coming up on 13 years this year. Started as a document reviewer, so really processing documentation as it was submitted to those paper TMFs. Back when I started, I was dealing with entirely paper trial master files. Throughout the years, I've taken various roles as more of a TMF lead, a TMF manager, collaborating with sponsors and CROs to set up trial master files, to develop TMF plans, to host audits and inspections. And in the last few years, I've really had a passion for training, and I've been delivering our TMF University courses here at LMK that some of you may have already participated in, or others might be registering for upcoming cohorts or even into 2025. But I'm very passionate about the TMF space. I think it's often misunderstood. So I like to educate people on what the TMF is. And I'm so excited that we actually have our first TMF Career Week because we really want people to know that there is a career or profession in the TMF space. I know when I started, a lot of people looked at TMF as kind of an entryway into the clinical research space, and they have aspirations of CRA and project management, data management, and so on. But as the TMF space has really evolved in the recent years, we've seen careers develop. So we're excited to share throughout this week the opportunities in the TMF space. But I'm also joined by some colleagues at LMK, and I'll have them introduce themselves. And Krishna, I'll have you start, if you don't mind, and just give a little background about who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. I just want to say thank you so much to LMK, for organizing this beautiful event, and I'm happy to be part of it. And my name is Krishna. I'm currently working as a TMF senior support analyst here at LMK. So my experience in this TMF world is almost close to 8 years now, and like everyone else, I've also started my journey working in paper TMF and gradually started moving towards fully TMF platforms. I've worked in both CRO and sponsor level platforms that help me gain knowledge across multiple eTMF platforms. We have VivoVault, Wingspan, eTMF Connect. There's just so many else right now. I am currently residing at Michigan with my wife, and in my free time, I love to traveling to new places and spending time with my family and friends. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Krishna. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about yourself outside of work. I think that's always great to share that as well and make us a little bit more human. So appreciate that.
Yes.
Rajani, can I have you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Sure, Ben. Thank you. Welcome everyone for the day two event of the TMF Career Event. Thank you all for joining. My name is Rajni, and I'm a Senior Support Analyst at LMK. I'm specialized with the TMF implementations, migrations, and regulatory compliance. I have been working in TMF world for past 6 years, and I started my career as CTA. And worked in several projects doing TMF indexing or TMF QC, completeness checks, and making sure the TMF in good state. I'm a certified professional in TMF project manager, and I'm happy to be in the panel.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I appreciate it. I think you both have highlighted different aspects of the role, whether that's through migration support, QC, and review, collaborating between sponsors and CROs with implementation of systems. So I'm excited to see some of kind of those buzzwords and catchphrases mentioned just in general, right, within the TMF space, whether it's technical skill oriented or just kind of that TMF career as a whole. Again, I can't express how passionate I am about just TMF professionals in general and really us making our own claim to fame, so to speak, in the clinical research space and showing we're important as well, right? So we're often overlooked. But excited to kick off today a little bit more formally and focus on technical skills. I know in day one, our colleagues had focused more on soft skills like communication, which is very, very important. It's kind of more of the intangible, so to speak, as to what a TMF professional is. And in today's course with the technical skills, it's going to be much more specific to, as a TMF professional, professional, what are some of the skills that really stand out that we do day to day, or that are kind of the foundation of being successful as a TMF professional. So we have some skills that we'd like to highlight kind of as a team. I think we each have a couple that are important to us or have been significant to us in our career that we just kind of want to briefly highlight for everyone. And then we're also going to have an opportunity to interact with you all. So if you do have questions, comments, if you want to acknowledge something, if you want to kind of make a counterpoint, we welcome any type of feedback. You can do that directly in the comments through the LinkedIn post where this is being live streamed. So we'll see those come in. We may not acknowledge them right away just because if we're in the middle of the thought, we do want to make sure we get through that. I know sometimes I can get a little distracted, but we'll always come back to it. Or if we can't get to it, if there's a lot of questions today, we will certainly have the opportunity to follow up on any questions that are asked that maybe we couldn't get to in the time that we are allotted. I know we have about 45 minutes together scheduled. It may not go that whole 45 minutes. It really just depends on the amount of engagement, questions, excitement that you all share. We, of course, have a little bit of material that we want to discover, but when we developed TMF Career Week, of course, we really wanted to highlight what being a TMF professional is, what are the skills that are needed to be a TMF professional. But we also wanted this to be an opportunity of engagement to hear from you all. What are your questions, comments, concerns? What are the areas that you really want to make sure that we explore or talk about? Are there technical skills that you have questions about and how you can improve? Ask those questions. We'll certainly work to do our best to make sure we answer each and all of those today or in the follow-up. So again, just excited to interact with everyone today, talk about some of the technical skills. So I think at this point, like I said, we each have a few that we want to go through that, again, when we were kind of preparing for this, we were thinking, all right, what jumps out to us? What has been significant to you in your career? So I think we're each going to share here as we kind of move along. And Rajani, I think I'll start with you, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing one of your skills, and then Krishna, I'll have you maybe share one of yours and I'll go, and then we'll kind of just go through the skills that we wanted to share, if that works.
Sure. I'll start with the document quality knowledge. Any TMF professional should have a good knowledge of and understanding of how to review the documents, and knowing the document life cycle management and including the criteria, review and approval, and archiving the documents is the key for maintaining the TMF. And this includes understanding what should be in each document and whether that document requires a signature, a version date, or all pages are present in the document, and that the document is legible, and the document should be in compliance with the Alcoa principles. And just to name these a few examples.
Yeah.
And TMF professionals are the last line of defense between inspectors and all the organizations.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree there. And I think I'm glad you've highlighted document QC, and we've kind of started with that because I think at the core of being a TMF professional, that document knowledge is so important, right? When we think about the trial master file, I think oftentimes it's fairly synonymous with document quality and completeness. So understanding how to review a document for the appropriate attributes, is it acceptable for the trial master file? You know, even if someone is a TMF manager or a TMF lead, I think it's very important that they have those kind of foundational or that foundational understanding of what document QC is, because it's something that we are responsible for ensuring, right? You said we're the last line of defense between the TMF and auditors and inspectors. And if we're doing those reviews, we need to make sure that we understand what is correct and what's not correct. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Krishna, is there anything skill you'd like to specifically address for the crowd?
Sure, yes. Since our topic of discussion today is technical skills, so I would say we want to talk about proficiency with the TMF systems.
Mm-hmm.
As we know that, previously we used to follow paper TMF, and FDA has made a decision that everything should be moved to eTMF platform. So as eTMFs have been increasingly common within industry, I would recommend that, a good TMF professional need to have an understanding of how to use these systems,
Yep.
and, how you can maximize their efficiencies. Whether this can be, if you're a beginner, you can just Google for what are the systems that's been commonly practiced in the industry, and how you can navigate. There's lots and lots of examples. There are PDFs and documents that you can get. You can navigate, how you can navigate through it, how can you search through it, what is metadata, how you can apply it when you're uploading a document. how you can generate system reports, because there's loads and loads of data that's been putting into the system, and you need to know, for one specific artifact or sub artifact, how we can get a report, how you can review it. So all that is important for you to get proficiency with the system, and more importantly, a team of professionals should feel confident training other functional areas on how to use the ETMF systems within the organization, because you're working with multiple functional teams, and everyone will come to you as a guidance tool for you to let them know what is this, how you can navigate through it, and how they can apply by uploading a document, and all that. I think it's important to have proficiency.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think you made a really good point around maximizing efficiencies in systems, if I'm recalling correctly, the language that you used. And I think that's so important because there's a difference in using a system and really leveraging a system to be advantageous for our organization. So yes, we can file documents in any eTMF platform, right? And understand how to upload a document, but do we understand how to use that system for reporting and for metrics and to understand completeness of the trial master file? And I also like that you talked on kind of that training aspect. And so I think a lot of times, at least in my career, it has felt like TMF in general, like the TMF department, has been a little bit just kind of behind the scenes, right? They're looked at more as like administrative, file the documentation. But to your point, maybe we should be a bit more proactive, right? In educating people on how to use the system. So not only our own proficiency, but when our organization is proficient and understands how to generate reports independently and file documents and apply metadata, that makes us all better. It makes us more efficient. It's going to reduce those audit and inspection findings, hopefully, right? That's the goal. So I think you make a really good point there. And I also really appreciate that you had mentioned, Googling, right? Like using your own resources. Maybe you haven't worked in a system, but searching online. There's YouTube videos that are out there. I think you had mentioned there's like PDFs and presentations that are also out there that kind of get people familiar with at least the look and the feel of a system. I think it's hard to beat actual hands-on practical application. But, if nobody's ever seen an eTMF platform, right? You're like, what does it look like? You could Google, there's a YouTube video. You could search many of the vendors that are out there. They have these kind of either training videos or just kind of sales pitch or business development videos that show the system to at least kind of get you familiar with what to expect. So I also appreciate you acknowledge that maybe people don't have experience, but there's ways to get that experience through just available resources. So I think that's a really good one. Something that I think is important that a lot of people maybe don't love. I'm the person, I love to talk about the stuff that people often avoid. And so for me, that's going to be regulatory knowledge and understanding how we operate and why we operate the way that we do within the TMF space. So I don't think anybody that's worked within the clinical research industry is naive to the fact that there's a lot of regulation, right, around how we operate, the do's and the don'ts. And in the TMF space, it's a little bit more challenging, right? The regulation is oftentimes a bit vague when it comes to the trial master file. It just says, hey, make sure the TMF is complete, of good quality, but it doesn't really tell us how we get there. So as a TMF professional, it's really important for us to understand what is required by regulatory agencies, because we're going to become the decision makers in implementing processes and procedures within our own organization. And so, when I talk with folks about why regulatory guidance exists, it really centers around protection of subject safety, adherence to integrity of clinical trials, ensuring quality of documentation and completeness of documentation. And so understanding what's required by regulatory agencies as a TMF professional, again, allows us to make those decisions to develop our processes more accordingly, to make sure they indicate how long we have to resolve an issue or how long we have to file a document. I know it's a bit overwhelming, though, with that regulatory guidance, because there's many different regulatory agencies that provide guidance out there, and it can seem a bit overwhelming. But as a TMF professional, what we really need to understand is we're not expected to be an encyclopedia, right? We don't need to memorize what the guidance is. We just need to know where is that guidance and how to interpret that guidance at times when it might be a bit more vague. So for me, that really stands out as just having a confidence in knowing what the regulatory agencies require and then being able to implement that within our own organization. That's really what's going to set us apart as a TMF professional if we're looking to grow within this particular space. I know we each had a couple others, or maybe one other, that we wanted to discuss, and I'm just doing a quick time check for us. Want to make sure, again, for those that are maybe listening in, have questions, comments, and if you want to put them in real time, you can certainly do that. As we're kind of talking through, we're going to have a more specific time at the end for Q&A. But if there's anything that anyone says, you're like, oh, I like that point, or can you elaborate? Please let us know. Again, you can engage with comments directly in the live stream on LinkedIn. But maybe, Krishna, I'll kind of reverse it and put it back on you if there's a second skill that you wanted to highlight for folks with technical skills.
Sure. As I was saying before, I want to focus a little bit more on data analysis and reporting. Like people always have this misconception of TMF is something that you always do in the very end and not in the beginning or during the course of the study, but which is really not a good thing, because you need to know your metrics, where your TMF stands at the beginning, during the course, and always at the end as well. Because TMF and metrics are really important resources for organizations when it comes to understanding the health of the TMF. For TMF professionals, it is important to understand how to generate these reports and how to communicate what the reports are indicating. It's not like at the very end you get the health reports and you find that this lot many documents are missing, and then you can't miraculously get all those missing documents that's supposed to be from the beginning, right? So any these reports are something, these are very minimalistic. Anybody can look at this report to see what the quality issues are. But you being as a team professional would you have a different lenses that you can see through these reports and identify what are those that are truly missing, and what are the steps that you can prepare and determine if there is any potential trends that's happening or risks that is associated with the output. Because at the end of the day, we are doing this that are, as you were saying, we need to be standard to regulatory standards and FDA. We have all sorts of guidance and rules. So if potential for any potential audits, by following these reports, you would understand the criticalities and trends, and you can prevent them for any future audits. And thereby, there's also likely to further investigate through any future reportings. And if there's something else that is missing, you can find it out and clear off in the due course.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mentioned like TMF professional kind of has a different lens in which they look through with metrics and reporting, because I think that's honestly quite true, right? When we think about metrics and reporting, in a lot of eTMF platforms, anyone can run a report, right? Like you can go into your report section, generate, a quality report, a completeness report, a submission inventory, outstanding quality issues, and anybody can look at that information. But I think as a TMF professional, as you mentioned, we really need to be able to analyze that information and see what is it actually telling us, right? Not just looking at a metric as a one snapshot in time, but overall, what is this saying as a trend, right? Are there issues? Are we seeing a decrease in submissions? Like, are people, as the study goes on, they're sending less and less documents because we're not prioritizing the trial master file anymore? Are we not closing out quality issues in a timely manner anymore because, again, we're failing to prioritize the trial master file, or we're outside of our normal TMF QC cycle, so people aren't really in that mindset to close out those issues? So yeah, I think a lot of people, they just look at metrics and reporting as this kind of automated thing, right? Of like, oh, here's just a bunch of information. But as you mentioned, as a TMF professional, we really have to understand, what is this information telling us, and how do we communicate this? Kind of tying in the soft skills from yesterday, how do we communicate that effectively to our project team so that we all have the same understanding, right? One of the biggest issues that we see is that people fail to recognize trends or risks early. So if they would have generated a report over time and seen that quality went from 99 to 98 to 97 to 96%, they could have taken an intervention earlier on. And that's what we want these TMF professionals to be doing, right? Recognizing what the information is from these metrics and reports, and then communicating that to the project teams to take appropriate corrective or preventative actions. So I love that. Rajani, can I ask you to close out with your final comment there?
Sure. As Krishna mentioned, like how important it is to have the data and pulling the reports, right? The main advantages of having a eTMF is having our metadata. Any TMF professional should be proficient with understanding the metadata. And metadata is the extension of the document, quality and information. It is important that the information be captured accurately. So the professional must be determined which metadata is important to note.
Mm.
And about the document, whether be it the name of the personal or the date of the document or
Okay.
the signature date or the version, based on this, like the metadata really helps to pull the reports and to know all the EDLs and any kind of information about all the documents that we have in the TMF. We do have lots and lots of documents, loads of documents in the TMF, and to know about what documents we have in the
Mhm.
system, the metadata really helps us. And to example, like if the site personal name is captured in the metadata, then we know what all the documents are filed in a TMF to pull the reports. Um, so having the knowledge of metadata and what to capture is the main
Yeah.
key for TMF professionals.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, a lot of times people don't understand metadata. I'm glad that you've kind of said that the metadata is like that extension of document quality. I think a lot of people just view metadata as something that we do, right? It's like, oh, it's like part of it, but the document itself, right? That's what's telling the story. But in an eTMF environment, especially, the metadata from a regulatory perspective is an expectation to be captured. It's an extension of that document quality, and we want to make sure that it is accurate. So as you mentioned, a TMF professional needs to be able to discern what information needs to be pulled into the metadata. I know I often see in my experience, folks will, or organizations will implement metadata that says document date, right? And so you have to choose what is the relevant document date. And we know IRB approvals could have a letter date, it could have a meeting date, an approval date, it could have dates of documents within the actual approval letter itself. And we're like, oh my gosh, which one do we choose? And TMF professionals need to be able to understand what is the relevant information for this document. How do I capture that in the metadata appropriately as well? Because as you mentioned, I'm really glad you tie that into kind of Krishna's point about metrics and reporting. That information can be pulled out separately as well. And if that information is inaccurate, then we may have a misunderstanding of the health or completeness of the trial master file. I do see a couple of questions come in. I just want to make sure there's nothing too right on the back. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Belinda, for sharing. What are some of the key guidance documents relevant to the eTMF that you would recommend? So in this, from an eTMF perspective, and we think about relevant guidance, I'll kind of take the lead here. And Rajani and Krishna, if you have different experiences, please let me know. But when it comes to operating within an eTMF and kind of expectations, really the baseline is always going to be regulatory guidance, right? And so within the world of clinical research, there's many different regulatory agencies that operate, right? It's really entirely dependent on the region in which you are conducting that clinical trial. The good thing about regulatory guidance is there's general agreement on expectations. So what I mean by that is there's not really a direct contradiction in a lot of regulatory guidance, meaning one regulatory agency says you must capture metadata and another regulatory agency says you cannot capture metadata, right? That's a contradiction. Some may say you need to capture these three fields of metadata, and another regulatory agency may say we don't require any specific fields of metadata. We just, there's metadata that should be captured. And so it's not a contradiction, it's just a different expectation. The reason I kind of go on that little tangent there is to say regulatory guidance is going to be your kind of go-to resource because it sets the foundation, right? It's how we develop SOPs, or it should be how we develop SOPs within our own organization, because the intent of SOPs is to meet, or it's what we use to meet that regulatory guidance. So there'll be regulatory guidance through the various agencies, which is available on those regulatory agency websites. If you're not familiar with which regulatory agency operates within your particular country, you can use an internet search engine to do that. I'll also see if we can post some resources. I know we have some collaboration and partnerships with some organizations that have kind of a cheat sheet, so to speak, of here are the regulatory agencies for these countries. And then you can review their various guidance around the trial master file and eTMF. There's also good clinical practice, or ICH GCP. That's kind of a baseline for regulatory guidance as well for just TMF expectations. Now, for the eTMF itself and like leveraging an eTMF platform, that's going to be kind of variant depending on each of the platforms. So if anybody's maybe thinking like, how do I get more experience? If I'm not currently working in an organization or in the clinical trial or TMF space, and I don't have access to a trial master file, how can I get better? As Christian had mentioned, there are resources available online that kind of have overviews of systems. You could reach out for product demos as well with organizations. You can leverage presentations and slides that are available to get better experience with just navigating the system. But that is a little bit more difficult to do than the regulatory piece, just because, again, access to the system is going to be the best thing that you can get there. So just want to acknowledge that one. And then the next question there, regulation. I know I was talking about regulation, so I'm happy to leave this one as well. I know people love to talk about regulation, so I'll kind of stay in this space. Are there regulations regarding naming conventions? So as far as definitive expectations, and this is what we love about regulation, is that there are expectations, but they're not definitive, right? There is no defined or prescribed universal method for naming documentation. The general agreed upon standard and expectation for document names in an eTMF environment is that you should know what document you are about to open before that document is open. So it's not a needle in a haystack, right? The documents shouldn't say document 1, document 2, or, my name, Ben Rogers. It shouldn't just say Ben Rogers, right? Is it Ben Rogers CV? If I work at a site, which site is that? Is that site 101 or is that St. Jude's, right? You can name them different things, but you want that document to be identifiable. Like if you essentially generated a report that said, what are all of the documents filed in the trial master file? You would be able to know exactly what documents they're based off the naming convention. So some type of description. So for example, if you had a CV for a site personnel, so Ben Rogers, CV, site number, maybe site 101, Ben Rogers, B Rogers, Rogers Ben. You could do it a couple different ways. CV, right? That's the document, because I could also have protocol training. I could have a medical license. I could have a financial disclosure form. So you want to differentiate what is this for Ben Rogers, and then you're probably going to want to put a date associated with that document because my CV might be updated or training might be updated. So some briefly identifying information is the general expectation. But again, that's usually a decision you can make at your organization or in collaboration with your vendor, if you do use a vendor for your eTMF system, or even your IT team if you develop that system in-house to choose that naming convention. So again, you want it to identify the document by the name, but there's no defined, it has to be this way. Oh, okay. So Krishna and Rajani, I know you both have experience with document QC. And this one here, I think we have highlighted. When it comes to document QC, do you find that there are certain attributes that maybe people tend to overlook? Like in your experience, have you had to help support people with a certain attribute that's tricky? Like in your experience and review a document, is there something that jumps out to you? They're like, oh yeah, I maybe in my own experience have forgotten to check for this, or that, colleagues have struggled with, or you've heard in meetings that people struggle with. Anything that comes to mind for either one of you?
Sure, Ben. I think during the initial stages of my TMF journey, what I mostly found was people overlooked particularly into this 1572s and CVs and stuff, right? We have, if the study has a particular naming guidance for document dates, that's something. If it's in a year, month, and date format, people always try to overlook that. It's sometimes the 1572 just been written as 2022 and that's it. You don't have anything, and people just take that as January 1st, 2022, and put that as a document date. But technically, that's something that you should identify it as a quality issue, because that's not how it's supposed to be. And people always try to just see that you have a date, so I think it's good to go, and they just use it. And if it's a lot of European countries use it in different way, right? They have it day followed by month, and then the year, right? So when you have the study that's across the border, like you have European studies and you have European sites and US sites, you always have the confusion of how the document dating should be put into the metadata. So that's something people always tends to overlook. I think that's one thing. And then, like you said, previously, when it comes to approvals and submissions, there's lots and lots of dates on the document. Like there's a document date, approval date, a signature date, version date. And I think I would always recommend you using your TMF index as your standard
Yeah.
one place to go, and then whatever that's been, because index is something that your company as a with by discussing across the study teams have
Mhm.
come to a decision of what kind of a document date should be used, and that should be
Yep.
your ultimate guidance. So just blindly just go whatever that's been put in the TMF index, and make sure you have that in there. So that's also something that people always overlook too. So these are the
Yeah,
two.
no, I think those are both fantastic. And Rajani, did you have anything that you wanted to add or agree
Yeah,
with?
I would like to add like the pagination is one thing. Like we have some documents which has like hundreds of pages, right?
Mhm.
So it's easy to miss if something is missing in between, like 10 pages are missing in the document, or
Yeah.
the page direction is changed. It's hard to go through every page, but that is something that we overlook sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think that those are both really fantastic, and they seem so minor, right? Of like, oh, of course we know the document date, but to your point, if a document is signed 03/04/2024, is that March 4th or is that April 3rd? How do you know, right? How do you
Yeah.
choose the right date?
Yeah.
And dates are significant because if we run a metrics report and we're looking for approvals from March, right? It's like, well, if we put it as April, maybe we don't see that document come in. So that's a really great point. So yeah, I appreciate you both kind of sharing the expectations there. And I think the pagination, especially we're kind of fortunate that a lot of documents that come in are generally under a couple of pages, right? Especially like when I get medical licenses to review, I'm like, yes, like I can breeze through these a little bit more quickly. But to your point, sometimes fatigue sets in and people are like, oh, when you get a protocol that's 80 pages long, you're like, oh, the protocol is going to be right, right? Like there's no issues here. But you get on page 75 and there's a missing signature, or all of a sudden there's a missing page or a blank page. And I do think people sometimes struggle with those longer documents because they're trying to get through the review so quickly to get to the next one. So I think you both have highlighted two great points there. So fantastic. And I did see some praise. I just want to acknowledge it too. I know we can kind of see the comments come in. It's not a question, but just Christian and Rajani got some praise just for the inputs that you've shared and the importance of the various skills that are needed. So just want to say again, kind of thank you for your time and kind of facilitating this alongside of me, and did want to acknowledge that in front of everyone. I think that's fantastic. If I don't have all of the skills, can I be successful? So I ask both of you, when you started your career and you're now kind of on a panel, right, talking to folks about being a TMF professional, do you think, how have your skills grown? Do you maybe want to share just like a brief history of like how you improved your own skills as a TMF professional? Do you think you started with the same skill set that you have now? Maybe. What do you think?
No, definitely not. I would say, you certainly don't have all the skills while you're beginning working in TMF. So it's all part of the, your daily, I would say, everything that you're doing is kind of interrelated with the TMF.
Mhm.
You're looking at a document, even though if you're in a different functional group, you're looking at a document, you're technically doing something called Alcoa standards, which means you're basically making sure that if it's all clear, making legible. So
Mhm.
of course, like if you don't have any of these skills, the work that you're doing, it's also kind of related to TMF in one aspect, I would say. And
Yep.
part of being a TMF professional is being, I think, adaptable, and you should have that willingness to take a step and have a keen to learn what this thing is. And like we mentioned, like the skills that we mentioned are not just bread and butter. There's many other skills that you can always develop and honor as you keep working in this industry.
Yep.
And there's always a starting point for one thing to begin your journey. So you can start working with just one skill, and then as you keep working on multiple studies, you can develop multiple skills as you keep moving. And uh, so I would say nothing to panic about.
Perfect. Yeah. And Rajani,
I would
anything you'd
like
like
to,
to add?
yeah, sure. In addition to like regular document knowledge and everything,
Mhm.
having a knowledge of regulatory is important, right? Going through FDA documents, or
Mhm.
the frequently asked questions, or going through some papers and developing the knowledge with the regulatory uh,
Yeah.
roles, that will help us anyone to get into the TMF world.
Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, I certainly appreciate you both speaking to maybe where your skills have developed, and that's so true, right? It's the most difficult part is probably getting in the door, and so I think
Mhm.
for me, like document review, for example, is something maybe I felt a little bit confident with, but in my own career, something I've had to get better about. Maybe another technical skill to kind of add on here at the end are like project management skills, like budgeting and resourcing. As a TMF professional, I think it's often assumed that TMF work is easy, right? Oh, you use an eTMF. How hard is it to review a document? And to your point, Rajani, about those long protocols, it takes time to actually review them and do that correctly. And the metrics and reporting, as we mentioned, that takes time to actually do. So understanding what the resource effort is of TMF professionals and how to manage that from kind of a leadership perspective is very important. Like, how much effort is it going to take to effectively manage this study from a TMF perspective? That's something I've really had to develop within my career to understand kind of the budget and resourcing strategy. Those kind of foundational skills I felt a little bit more confident in, but there's always room to grow. And I think that's the important thing to remember, and kind of to maybe pitch tomorrow's course a little bit more. I shouldn't say course, but session with like the interview success and tips is selling yourself and the skills that you do have. And so data entry and document review, I always tell people, like, I don't, I haven't reviewed a protocol, I don't know what a 1572 is, I don't know what like project plans are and what they look like and what to review for. And I'm like, okay, but think about when you are creating a document in your personal life, like you're writing a check, you're writing a note to someone, you're filling out a form at a doctor's office, there's check boxes, there's things that you have to accurately report. You know how to complete a document, right? Like, the general expectations for document completion. You know how to check for your signature and confirm the date information's right. Or if, somebody sends you something like a contract, you know how to kind of review that and make sure it's accurate. Those skills are transferable, right? So for those of you that may doubt your document knowledge, you may not know all the clinical research expectations, but knowing if a document has all pages, that's pretty universally transferable, right? Knowing if a document was signed, universally transferable. Knowing if a document is legible, you can do that. You're already doing a lot of these things in your day-to-day life. So hopefully in tomorrow's session, you'll learn a little bit more about actually how to be successful in interviews, and kind of how to sell yourself. So I think there is a lot to come from that one as well. And so I know we're kind of wrapping up here. We've got questions have kind of dwindled a little bit, but do appreciate the engagement and opportunities that we've had to chat with everyone. And hopefully you've seen there are skills beyond just kind of document review. Again, people, when I started, thought TMF was a little bit boring because all we do is review documents. There's so much more. We're kind of, I like to look at us as like investigators in the sense of like a private investigator, where we're kind of snooping around. We're trying to look at the metrics. We're kind of trying to figure out information, put the pieces of the puzzle together to tell the story of the trial master file. So hopefully you all have found benefit from this. Just really appreciate the time today. Again, Krishna and Rajani, from you as well, in sharing your experiences. So again, yeah, tomorrow, let me say, I know we got some questions coming in and that we will address just as we're wrapping up today. So we'll get those, we'll send those out to those individuals directly, as just they kind of come in at the last second. But just want to say thanks for joining. Kind of see on your screen here tomorrow, same time, same place. Join us, and I'll be back on day 4 to speak with everyone. So excited to see some faces again if you're joining. But thanks everybody for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.